talk about something that I had discussed earlier on when I mentioned about the family dynamics and family systems and how we look at them and how we look at the individual responses in within those family systems. One description of a way that a person could be identified in the family in order to stabilize the family was the parentified child. I hope you remember that series. And so when you think of parent and you think of child, you do know those are both very much in contrary of one another, because one is a both are roles and both have sort of specific things, descriptors and different ways of reactions and behaving that are inconsistent with the two different descriptions, the two different statuses, the identification. So with the parentified child, if you think about the word, you think about a person who's under the age but has a lot of the responsibility as a parent would or a caregiver would. And so the reason that I wanted to talk a little bit about that is because I do think that that is really an area that gets a lot of attention eventually when that child becomes an adult and enters into services, such as with a therapist like myself. And one of the things that I noticed in that expression of having that experience is that the person learns early on how to control an environment. When I did foster care years ago, years and years ago, one of the things is that the oldest child or whomever that child who uh, they identified as the more responsible one, who was sort of like the parent's second hand man, I really had to kind of be very sophisticated, sensitive, but also very creative in bridging a trust relationship with that child. Because, like I said, they were absolutely very skillful in controlling the environment. When I say the environment of the home, the environment of their siblings, and possibly have a lot of influence on that parent as well. But on the flip side of that, that person was always the person who oppressed his or her feelings. And when I say the lack of emoting was across the spectrum, whether it was good stuff that we did together or whether it was things that were not good, that expression of emoting, that expression of acknowledging one's feelings was immediately dismissed from these parentified child, you know, um, expressions. The other thing that I learned about these young people who were in these situations is that they were extremely responsible. Um, I would, if we're talking about something within that family, that person would be like, oh, I'll take care of it. Oh, I'll take care of it. And they just absolutely take care of it, actually. And however, it caused the other siblings or even the parent to do less and also not even develop. Like they had just become, um, inactive, immobile, unproductive, with just kind of like operating as a full system rather than operating from one system, one part of the system to get something done. And that person also, on the flip side of that, really just isolated themselves. They became ultraly independent. And, we've heard the phrase before, being super responsible is a reaction or response to trauma. And so, I mean, it was hard to kind of intervene in those people with that stoic type of thinking because it has worked. And when something has worked, mostly, it's hard to kind of help the person perceive that something else could easily work, where it's less of that person and more of the system operating and keeping everybody balanced with responsibility. And then the final thing, and with the parentified child, in some situations, what I found is that child really uses a form of aggression to get the system moving. Obviously, because a child, that's sort of how they kind of do things. They like, this is mine, and run around and won't give the toy bag, and then an adult intervene. So aggression is what became a form of expression. It became a form of doing. It became a form of being. And so that form of regression also led to distancing between the siblings, where they didn't see that person as a sibling. They saw this person as a person who ruled over them and who used the means that a child would use, which is physical aggression, verbal aggression, and so forth. And so the sibling relationship never could form in a way where it was supportive and loving and all the good things that comes with a sibling relationship. And so with that, you have the contrasting roles and responsibilities. So the status, you have one status is the age, and the other contrary indicator is obviously the role that the person plays in meeting the needs of the entire group. And that usually, contrasts. And so you can only imagine how the person is experiencing life emotionally. Many times these young people, once they become adults, they've had long-standing chronic issues with anxiety, with depression, with anger, with guilt, shame, uh, overextending themselves, isolation, and so on, and sort of have this different way of connecting, even as adults, with other adults now that they, have been able to age more, age out of out of their family. And so getting free from that comes with a cost. It just does. It just takes time. It takes patience. It takes sensitivity. And it does take, the effort from the person who came in to sort of address some anxiety or depression to look at things from a different perspective. And that perspective takes time for them. And so one of the things that make me think about, the time that it takes is usually because when there's a system that functions, and when I mean function, I'm just talking about the basic. Like everybody's fed, there's a home to go to, everybody gets to school, everybody has on clean clothes. Uh, we kind of use that as a measure. We kind of use that as one measurement of like, well, things aren't that bad, and because we still function, and we do applaud those strengths in those type of situations. As yes, things continue to move forward and they continue to function. However, you have heard of the term dysfunction. And DYS in the medical term, it is described as bad and difficult. So when we say dysfunction, we're saying that this family system is functioning badly. And what I mean by badly is not the person, it's about what happens as a result of a child being put in a place of a role that he or she is not emotionally ready for. Maybe physically big, may be able to think how to execute something, but emotionally not ready for. So dysfunction means bad or difficult. With the child or the family is in a very difficult, system. So with that being said, we're always looking at how to maintain balance and everybody having a secure place in the family. And when you think about a waiter or waitress with a tray, they usually have one hand. But in order to have a balanced system wherever you are, you have to have more than one. If, you're bearing something, if you're carrying something, if you're holding something, if you are, responsible for something. So I always think about the waiter or the waitress with the one hand. And I'm like, well, then, I guess you can have one thing, one leg, one arm to balance. However, the way that the food is distributed on the tray that holds, that the hand and the arm is holding, that's what's creating the balance. Is that because there's a distribution of power, there's a distribution of weight, and there's a distribution on the person's arm where one side won't tilt, the other side won't tilt, that would lose and cause a accident or a complete disaster with that one, with only one holding or bearing up the weight of all that's on top of the tray. So the parentified child may be a descriptor for many people. There is a way out, and that way out requires you to be sensitive and gentle to yourself because you didn't create it and you didn't cause it, but you do have as you grow and work on yourself to change it. And my favorite quote is that you can always begin again. And if you want to do that, go for it. You'll find that it's worth it. Thank you for joining me today. I will see you tomorrow. Bye bye.